Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Architectural Review Board. Find my agenda shortly. Could you call the roll, please?
Yes. Chair Firth.
Here.
Vice Chair. Who's Vice Chair?
Balte is not here.
Not here.
Anticipated absence.
Thank you. Board Member Guyer.
Here.
Board Member Liu.
Here.
Board Member Thompson.
Here.
Thank you.
Now is the time for anybody who wishes to speak to us on an item not on the agenda. Is there anybody? I don't have a speaker card. There is not. So agenda changes, additions, and deletions?
None.
Okay, does anybody on the board have any comments? I mean, the only comment, if you look at item 1, which has future agendas, you will see that March would seem to be a fairly intense month in terms of agenda items.
There are some changes to those items.
Thank you.
We have one additional item for March 1st. That's the Junior Museum and Zoo is proposing to modify the roof materials. And on March 15th, the Tier 3 Cluster 2 for Vinculums Verizon will not be coming to you.
Thank you. Let's see, is this,
That was sort of given.
is this a request to speak during oral communication?
No, I think that's the garage.
Oh, okay, good enough. I never remember which lot is which letter. All right, then I think we're on to item 2, a public hearing. It's quasi-judicial. The site is 375 Hamilton Avenue. It's consideration of an architectural review application for a 5-level, nearly 50-foot tall parking structure with one below-grade parking level providing 338 public parking spaces. It also has retail space. It would eliminate one existing public restroom and is designed to comply not with the current public facilities ordinance zoning standards, but with proposed new standards which were considered by the Planning and Transportation Commission recently. The draft environmental report is still in preparation. This agenda says late February, but I believe that staff will tell us that date has been moved back. Could we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. Amy French, Chief Planning Official, overseeing the process on this project. Excuse my voice today. I've had laryngitis since Sunday. So the project is indeed a garage that would provide parking spaces for the public as well as retail space, a small amount. I will note that on the future notice for this project, we will include the words retail space in the notice. Today, the purpose is to learn about the project and the status and the timeline, to understand that, to receive the architect's presentation, ask questions of staff and the applicant and the architect, and provide guidance for the next plan set that would come to you. We're targeting April 19th as the next agenda date for this. Board Member Balte did provide written comments that were distributed to the Architectural Review Board yesterday. Again, we want to continue the public hearing for several reasons. One is we have not yet published the draft environmental impact report, and the target date is now, timeline is now the end of March. And so we want to have some comments, public comments in the public record at the Architectural Review Board hearing in April. So this gives an overview that is contained in the staff report. You saw this project last year, a different constitution of the ARB in September. Those minutes were, excerpt minutes were forwarded by email to the board, and there was a link in the staff report as well. As noted, the Planning and Transportation Commission on January 31st recommended the proposed zone changes that were requested with the Sherman Avenue Garage and Public Safety Building project. And those are to modify, to allow council to approve case by case each project, modified zoning standards for public safety or essential public facilities and public parking garages within downtown and California Avenue in the PF zone. And those included height, lot coverage, setbacks, including the special setback. I'm going to kind of skip through because I'm getting tired voice here. As you can see, I'm handling both projects. I don't want to walk you through this, but this is what I'm faced with. Personally, is to get both, there are really three projects, the public parking garage on Sherman, the public safety building, and this project through the process to the council for them to approve final EARs and the two projects and the zone code change. So we have some flexibility for the number of parking spaces actually in the garage. Though the council said how many to put in the garage, we do have some flexibility because we are proposing to remove the mailbox that's in the public right-of-way, city right-of-way, that people drive by to put their mail across the street. And that would introduce more parking spaces on the street. In addition, some council members noted their interest in having lift parking in this downtown garage. And so that's being explored, and that's the reason for the delay in the draft EAR. So this drawing on this slide shows a concept that our Transportation Division staff has put forward as to improve the pedestrian experience through the garage from Hamilton towards the proposed pedestrian alley. Okay. Getting tired. Our discussion today is, of course, to provide guidance on this project. Some questions have been raised, particularly about the pedestrian experience at the back of the building near CVS, that interface, and the questions about landscaping and seating. In the staff report, we recommended some additional attention there with taller landscaping along that facade. Another question was raised about when the parking system goes in with those gates, preventing cars from going through without paying in the future. Where would the pedestrians go who are parked at the back of that garage when they want to go to CVS? So that was a question that was raised, and it's a good one. So exploring that now. The special setback, again, this is dating back to the 1950s. You know, we think it was about the car is king, give more space to the cars, that we would widen the street at some point. Well, our thinking has changed, and we prefer narrower streets to calm traffic. So in any case, it's been recommended. The contextual setback in this area is of interest. Certainly the AT&T building next door is a 7-foot setback, but this proposed project does have a building separation, essentially, providing a 20-foot setback for the first 15 feet of the building next to AT&T building. So there is a 20-foot setback for some distance, but the remainder would be on the lot line. Now, to compensate for that, the project has a wider sidewalk proposed. And so the other considerations was, as Chair Firth mentioned, the removal of the public restroom. There are nearby retailers, including CVS, that have restrooms for their customers. I'm going to move forward. So I do have a slide for the Downtown Urban Design Guide, Hamilton Avenue District. If you want to see it later, let me know. I'm going to switch over to the applicant now. Thank you.
Good morning, board members. My name is Holly Boyd. I'm a senior engineer in Public Works. I'm the project manager for this garage. I just wanted to introduce some members of our design team right here. We have Michelle Wendler from Watry Design and Gordon Knowles from Watry Design. And we also have Ken Hayes, who is our lead architect on the project, and he will be giving the presentation. So I'll ask him to come up now.
You want to time him?
How come it doesn't go back? There we go.
Good morning, Mr. Hayes. The rules give you 10 minutes.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Chair Firth, members of the board. Welcome, Board Member Thompson. My name is Ken Hayes with Hayes Group Architects, and I'll be making the presentation on behalf of the team. We're actually working for Watry Design Groups, the experts in parking garage design on this project, and thank you for introducing everybody, Holly. So Council's direction for the redevelopment of Lot D, the existing parking lot, was 5 levels above ground, 1 level below ground, 338 parking stalls, bike spaces, a retail space on Waverly, excuse me, as well as future photovoltaic panels on the roof. The project site, I think we're all very familiar with it. It's a 29,000 square foot project site. A little more context here. Shows the project in the center. It's currently zoned PF. It's surrounded mostly by CDC, GF with a P, pedestrian overlay zoning district, although the AT&T building's a PF. The post office is a PF. The post office is also historic category 1. We have a historic category 3 at the Palo Alto Toy World on Waverly. As well as the Victorian House next to that, and then the Decker Oaks building on the corner of University and Waverly is also an historic building. You can see here the 7-foot setback across the front. We will be widening the sidewalk on Hamilton, reconfiguring the drop-off for the mail. This sidewalk will be 12 feet. The sidewalk along Waverly at this location will be about 18 feet, so we're going to extend those out to create a little bit more generous area. Lane 21 enters here and exits onto Bryant Street. It is one way in that direction from Waverly to Bryant Street. Just some images of the surrounding buildings. I showed you them back in September. The AT&T building, about 25 feet taller than our building. The All Saints Episcopal Church, 400 Hamilton, all clad in brick. And then we have the historic post office image there with its arcade across the front. So when we were here in September, we showed you 3 options, and there was some focus essentially on options 1 and 3. Option 1 and 3 had a strong arcade at the ground floor level, both on Waverly and on Hamilton. They had one or the other perforated metal panels above, or metal fins that added interest to the garage, but also allowed for the ventilation that's required. This is an unventilated garage at the upper levels. They all had a corner plaza as well as a larger welcoming stair than this option here. So we focused our, what you see today, on kind of a combination of options 1 and options 3. So some of the changes that were expressly made based on feedback from you was, this is a detail of the corner. Originally we had a 28-foot deep retail space, and I think everyone thought that was a little bit shallow, so we've now made that 35 feet, so we've increased the depth. We've also increased the area by about 450 square feet. There was some concern about how you see into the garage from the street frontages, and so before it was just a single path from Hamilton. You really couldn't see through in this direction, so the idea was to reconfigure this corner plaza, make it a little bit more generous, push the elevator back so that we can actually create a clean pathway here and one coming in from Waverly Street, so that no matter where you're coming, you can see into the garage. And that helps, I think, in terms of wayfinding and also safety. Walking down Waverly, this was one of the comments, and this really applied to option 3. Is there a way to, to make sure that the post office is afforded as much view opportunity as possible? And so the option we have today basically has pulled everything back that went into the corner plaza, so that as you approach the corner on that ground floor, you do see the post office as soon as possible, the main entrance there. Then we wanted to create a walkway to CVS, and we really like transportation's suggestion at the expense of some parking. So now we're at 334 spaces instead of council's direction for 338. But it does create a great way to come into the garage. You'll be walking along where all the bike racks would be. We think we can expand that bike rack area to include areas for people with strollers or bike trailers. So we've increased the potential for parking. It's not on your plan, but it's on the slide that you see here. And then have a right angle crossing that would send you right to the stairway that then comes from 4 levels above and feeds into this pedestrian connection that we have here, as well as the alley connection that is behind the buildings that face onto Waverly Street. So we get a little synergy here, which I think would be really great. And it reinforces people coming down. It's a circulation point. It'll probably be used more frequently than the one over here on the corner. And then future underground parking at adjacent lots. There was concern about Elizabeth Wong and Brad Ahikian's parcels. And so the thinking is that from the basement level, we could actually plan into the structural walls of that basement ways for blockout panels to take place to allow connections here. At grade level, the proposal with the alley in the back actually is wider than what they have now on those parcels, because what they have now is just the drive aisle of the parking lot, and that drive aisle now is going to become an alley, and so we're about 2 feet wider than the free space that they have right now for garbage collection and pumping of the grease interceptor and that sort of thing. Can we reduce the 10-foot pedestrian alley to provide greater setback along Hamilton? We can if we want to get rid of about 70 cars, all right? Our advice is to not do that, to really put some attention into the detail and the amenities of this pedestrian alley. So the garage is down to the bottom of the screen. This is Elizabeth Wong's building. This is Brad Ahikian's building. This is what we're proposing as that connection, that linkage. We need it for ventilation for the garage. We need 10 feet. Anything less doesn't work. And so if it's less than that, we're going to have to go to a mechanically ventilated garage. And in my opinion, that would be a waste of energy. This actually terminates with a view corridor towards the All Saints sort of open area of their front yard. And then in this direction here becomes the alley. We have a combined trash enclosure here. We have provisions for them to be able to get to those trash enclosures, to get behind their buildings and do any kind of servicing that they need to do at the grease interceptors and that sort of thing. And like I said, it's more room than they have today, if there's cars parked in the parking lot, that is. So this is the street facade here. You can see the AT&T building is quite a bit taller than our building. Our building's at about 49'10" to the top of the railing. This is a larger view of the front of the building. You see the arcade or the rhythm of columns and openings that are along Hamilton. Each of those openings is filled with a bench for seating, an integral planter into the building, an array of vine wires to get some plant material to, plant material to fill those openings, as well as some decorative metal, and the idea of the decorative metal throughout the garage to celebrate some of the decorative metal that you see in the historic buildings in the vicinity. We have a combination of the metal fins above to provide some interest. They're controlled by a metal frame that wraps around them, and then erode the corner at the end to highlight the elevator core. The stair becomes an enclosed stair now with perforated metal around it. Before it was an open stair, and one of the suggestions was to make that an enclosed stair. However, the stair sort of descends out of that volume so that you see people moving up and down quite easily to the plaza here. The perforated metal denotes the entrance there. It also denotes the entrance here, and it denotes the stair at the back when you've walked down the alley. This is the facade for Waverly, and again, we're trying to pick up on the 2-story rhythm and height of the buildings of that block. This is the historic building here. This is, I'm sorry, one more building down is the historic building. But we're trying to relate to the cornice line essentially of that building there, and then the retail space below you see there with the glass, and then above that would be, again, a decorative metal screen that would conceal the cars, but bring that, that color and that texture of the metal into the project. View from Hamilton, looking, I guess, west. You see the corner facade here. The materials are a sandblasted concrete for the arcade. We're really trying to bring in the color that you find in the sienna or terracotta tiled roofs, the brick on the corner building. So I think one of the strongest ways to relate to context is through color. You can see the perforated metal here. Again, we're thinking that all the metal is some kind of a bronze color, so it's dark. It's not anodized aluminum in any kind of a aluminum color. This is if we add the solar panels on top, what that could look like. And then a view from above and across. You can see the perforated metal again back here at that stair that you see when you look through. We have the solar panels above, and then some detail of the plaza itself. In 30 seconds, and I'm there.
You take what time you need. You're the only agenda item.
Okay. So we want to bring that decorative metal quality into the stairwork, and so you see it coming down to the plaza, and that would wrap up and through this perforated metal screen. This would be a detail of the benches, the back slopes, so that you could be comfortable there. The integral planters here. This is where the vines would infill those areas, and then we have the decorative metal screen behind that as well. Just some detail of the fins with the metal work around them, and then what that could look like on the right-hand side when the PV array is added. And then lastly, this is the alley. You see beyond the destination, the stair, the metal screen again, because it is an entrance identity. And then if you walk down to that stair and look back, you can see how we could start to animate that alley with plant material. We have bench opportunities, and then some kind of interesting lighting. So I think it could be a really interesting space. If you want to see a space that's similar scaled, go to Chop's new building on the corner of Hamilton and High, and look at the alley between the Palantir cafeteria building and his new building. It's almost identical. But I think we could really enhance that space. It could be a nice space. So that's my presentation. We all look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a number of public comment cards. And if members of the public wishing to speak, if you haven't submitted a card, would you please? Brad Hikian to be followed by Elizabeth Wong.
Thank you. We have Jaime Rodriguez here, who would like to combine Elizabeth and my card for the full time for the presentation that we have.
Untangle me a little bit more. I'm fine to have you speak in whatever order you'd like. I have 4 cards here. Elizabeth Wong, Jaime Rodriguez, and Brad Hikian, and Andrew Wong. What would you like?
We would like to combine them for one presentation.
It's fine with me. Sure, feel free. That
Great, thank you.
gives you.
They're allowed.
I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Jaime Rodriguez. I'm with Traffic Patterns. I'm a traffic engineering firm providing services to a couple of the property owners adjacent to this particular project. And our peer review of the plans for the garage really focused on the operations of the existing buildings, the businesses that operate within those buildings, and the long-term impacts both during construction and after. So here's a quick site plan again. Your architect already showed this to you. This is Waverly and Hamilton. The garage, or the existing surface lot on Hamilton Lot D is shown down towards the bottom right. We're here working with 2 of the property owners, Manhattan Associates, who's represented by Brady Hikian behind me, and they're basically the building that is owned where Prolific Oven is. Elizabeth Wong with Waverly Post, also behind me, is the building right next to that where the Taipan restaurant is. So those are the 2 buildings that are most immediately impacted by the construction of the garage itself. And for the people that are home that haven't had a chance to read the letter that was provided to you just yesterday, I'm going to walk through the presentation so people later can view this at home on their own to get a kind of high overview of what some of the design issues are that we're requesting additional accommodations on as part of this project. Most important and specifically is the issue of grease cleanouts. For people at home and for you that don't understand that, grease cleanouts include 2 elements. There's basically an underground storage tank that stores grease and other debris that get generated in kitchens, and they also include what are called cleanouts. Cleanouts are where vehicles or vacuums are accessing that debris to basically vacuum it out of the ground and take it away for recycling or for cleaning. And this is an example of what it takes to clean out these grease traps. You basically need the equivalent of what's called a Vector truck. The city staff use these around the city to clean out storm drains. They're used all over Palo Alto and other restaurants to pull out that debris. And they're cleaned on a weekly basis at the restaurant at Taipan. And what we're seeing right now is that the only feasible way for both these buildings to access grease pits that exist and all others that are being kind of planned right now in construction in Brad's building. You guys have a new application for another restaurant that will be building a second grease trap. You have to have a much higher ground floor. There's no way that these Vector trucks can connect the additional hoses and vacuums to back draw all this debris from these two kitchens, from the alleyway. You have to have access from where it takes place today, the equivalent of the lot on the ground floor. And that would require a much higher ground floor. I think right now you're about 11.5 feet. You probably need closer to a 16-foot ground floor ceiling height to accommodate any of these service vehicles that come in, including the grease trucks and potentially trash removal vehicles. Regarding parking, 550, 552, where Prolific Oven currently has 2 parking spaces. One's kind of dedicated to the space formally, and they operate a second parking space that they use regularly informally. Informal versus formal, that's still parking that's used by these buildings that will get lost both during construction and post-construction. 558 and 560 Waverly, where Taipan is, doesn't have any formal spaces, but they use one space regularly every day for different operations. So we're talking about immediately 3 spaces that are going to get lost. And what we're seeing in the plans that were provided by the city is that only 1 parking space is being provided back to the Prolific Oven building, and there's an inequity in the parking distribution back to the Taipan restaurant building with no parking. And so that's definitely a big concern for the team. So what we're suggesting that the city consider is to dedicate additional spaces within the ground floor of the garage immediately behind the buildings. There's 6 spaces that are shown on what is the northeast corner of the building. We would request that 2 spaces get provided per building, as well as a dedicated commercial loading zone with that higher 16-foot ground floor. Service vehicles can get in there, remove trash bins from the garage if you had second double door sets on the inside of the garage to pull the trash out, as well as the Vector trucks to clean out the grease pits from the Taipan restaurant and the future restaurant that's going to be built at 558 or 552. Preferably, if that's not something that the city is open to doing, then we would just request that you provide a 24-foot alleyway around both sides of the building that maintains a 2-way access to get vehicles in and out. Let's those buildings preserve their existing parking, but that would have some significant impacts to the project. And so we think that a really good kind of halfway point is just dedicate those spaces back to the building owners. Regarding future development of the buildings, the architects mentioned that there were going to be accommodations to be able to punch through at the basement level of the garages, future underground parking for the buildings that they ever get redeveloped. That's a great idea, but what's really missing in the plans right now is how that's going to happen. If this was a development project, you guys at the city would want to see details about how that future construction is going to happen, but that lacks today. And so there's just a big concern from our clients that it's great that the note is there, but if there's no accommodation or design details, it may be found later on that isn't feasible because the design doesn't actually accommodate for it. So we really think that this needs to really get taken care of at this design phase so that it's not an issue later in construction. In addition, in order for that to happen, any developer would have to have agreements that are handed to the city that say that we're going to work with another entity to give access to somebody else to move through our site. That actually hasn't happened for these projects. So as great as it is that we're getting kind of notes on the plans that show future access connection points, what's most important is that you have the dedicated access agreements agreed upon between the city and the private property owners, as well as the temporary construction easements or TCEs that allow them later to kind of punch through that wall. In addition, the long-term parking loss impacts from those walls punching through to provide the underground access needs to be documented and accounted for in the parking stall count for the project, because you're going to start out with a certain project space now, but then you're going to lose that later on when you provide that access. So the public really needs to understand what that long-term impact is going to be. So regarding trash operations, it's really good that the garage has a combined trash bin connected to the north, but that provides some significant impacts to the two buildings. It's great for the building behind Prolific Oven because the trash bin's immediately in front of their location, but for the Taipan restaurant, it introduces almost a 100-foot walk to actually take trash, other debris into the trash enclosure. That's a little bit of a concern for the property owner and the businesses because that introduces the opportunity for there to become injuries. Taking the debris that far, it introduces blockages to the pedestrian alleyway that the city's trying to create while all that trash kind of being relocated, and it introduces the opportunity for a spillage and other kind of impacts to whatever decorative papers you're trying to create by that trash being hauled away. So the more you minimize the distance from the buildings to those trash bins, the better in the long term for the community. And what we would recommend is that you consider creating two dedicated trash enclosures, one that's dedicated to the Prolific Oven building and a second that's dedicated to the Taipan building, both located immediately adjacent or behind each building to reduce that walking distance. Those, though, would need to be preferably remove the bins from the inside of the garage so that you're not worrying about then taking debris and spilling other trash and liquids kind of in the alleyway, staining that long-term and creating a long-term impact. So what we think would work best is if you dedicate those spaces, create those dedicated bins, you might have a one parking space impact, but in the long run, you're going to end up with a much cleaner operating pedestrian alleyway and a much cleaner operating garage. Regarding the shadow study for the project, our clients are still evaluating that. We're not going to provide too much specifics on the engineering side, but we did want to make some specific notes that did bounce out to us. One is that both clients were already in the process of looking at installation of solar panels to help reduce the operation cost of those buildings. We think that with those buildings coming in with their solar panels, that's going to block the ability of the suns to hit the panels that get installed on these buildings. So that's a long-term impact that we're still trying to figure out, but we wanted to make that note to you. If the buildings were just to get pushed back 24 feet on either side to allow two-way alleyways, that would protect the ability of both of these buildings for our clients to get good sun exposure for their solar panel systems. Regarding the alleyway, we've already expressed concerns to the city that as great of an idea as the alleyway is, you're basically creating an alleyway behind up to 3 kitchens now. And those kitchens do generate noise, they generate trash and odor that we don't think are going to be really amenable towards pedestrians wanting to dwell in that space. The other issue is the issue of how dark it is. Just from this example in the architect's renderings, you can see the alleyways are already dark kind of during almost all times of the day. And what really bounced out to us is that the average foot candle lighting of the alleyway is only 1 foot candle. That's the same foot candle design the city uses for its public streets that all the residents complain are too dark at night. And so you can tell from here, if it's dark in the evening, it's going to be worse in if it's dark in the dusk period, it's going to be worse in the evening for residents. The architect's presentation showed really nice examples of lighting kind of stretching between 2 buildings, but that's actually not what is proposed on the plans. All that's proposed is string lights kind of on the garage side of the building. And so with that, you're not going to get the type of lighting that both buildings feel is going to require or improve the safety of their employees in the buildings, as well as the public traveling on the backside. So the other thing is that we would request the removal of anything that would encourage people to dwell and sleep and kind of congregate in that back area for vandalism issues. Regarding the issues of the grease traps, again, we showed you how those grease traps need to be accessed. You got to take that vacuum truck and those big vacuum hoses, you need to push them from the garage on the first floor, through openings on the ground floor, through the back doors of the buildings and into the kitchens. The trees that are shown, the planters that are shown, those all conflict with those long-term operations. This building, as shown, will kill the operations of both businesses and any planned businesses at both of these buildings. The only way to do that is to remove the trees that are shown, that we highlighted in green, and remove the planter wall and provide more access space for service vehicles to be able to get in there and maintain those buildings. A couple of other issues regarding construction. You're basically going to be building a pit when you construct the garage. That's just part of construction. The applicants or the developers don't understand how grease trap operations are going to get maintained, but if there's an impact in cost, they're requesting that the city project take on the burden of removing that grease trap during the construction phase. Because of the fact that all the loading happens from the back of the building today, they're also requesting that during the construction phase, all of the parking or majority of the parking along the frontage of Waverly Street be converted to loading zones so that service vehicles continue to maintain those buildings. And if possible, create some type of a parklet and some type of an enclosure that lets all the trash bins be stored there so that service vehicles can come in and grab that trash and before they take it out after the project is done and move towards preferably 2 storage bins on the ground floor of the garage. We're also looking to hopefully request weekly cleaning of the buildings. You're going to be able to generate a lot of dust and debris. Any private developer would be required to do that. They do it on their own outside of the city, but in this case, the city has to take on that responsibility. The other issue that we didn't see addressed in the plans is the issue of drainage from both buildings. Both buildings have rooftop drains that either spill into underground storm drain systems or spill into the alleyway. And with the dark and loss of light to dry up that water that generates from the rooftops in the day and in the winter, we're seeing an issue of potential rodents and kind of moss generated in the pedestrian alleyway. So again, if you push the building back 24 feet, then that allows enough sun exposure to come in and kind of dry all that out during the day. So in regards to these issues, all that we're asking is that you let us sit down with the city staff more. Staff has met with the developers, with the clients in the past, but they haven't responded to the issues. So these issues aren't new to the city, they're just issues that haven't been addressed. And that's the end of our presentation.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? All right. Roxy, Mr. Rapp.
Good morning. Two ideas. One is across the street, you have the post office. And one of the problems with the development of the post office, they want to stay while you develop it and bring it up to seismic, clean out all the asbestos, et cetera, which is impossible to do a good job, especially in an historical building. My suggestion is for this board to encourage the city to work with the U.S. Postal Service and move across the street to the retail. It fits beautifully because it's a very narrow retail spot, so you can have all the post office boxes, and we really don't need as big as post office as we have now, because that used to be the main post office, it no longer is. So I think that would be terrific to move the post office across the street, and that would find them a new home where you can redo the existing post office. That's number one. Number two is, as most of you know, I developed with Jim Bear at 250 University, where we have the alleyway, which didn't come out as nice as I pictured it, but someday maybe it'll get changed. But we do have a trash room in the alleyway. And it's a tough situation to do. And looking at the plans that Ken just shared with me, my first suggestion would be to move the doors, that you move out the trash and move those doors to open up early in the morning to the alley itself, you can pull the containers into the alley, and right there, the dumpster can pick it up and dump it, and then you can move it back in. What I'm worried about is you move them out those existing doors, and then you hit into Brad's new building there. And then also you have that electrical box underground. And I don't care how careful you are, those dumpsters leak. And so then you would have all the smell of the different garbage, et cetera, going down into the electrical box that's under the ground that has a grate on top of it. So that would stop two things there. In regards to dumping the trash for the retailer, I would go ahead and keep a side door for the retailer doesn't have to go down into the alley to dump their existing trash. So you would actually have a set of doors or a one door, wide door that they'd open up to dump their trash from the retail operation. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the applicant, that is the city, like to respond? It's your turn.
So I would just like to say that we received the letter from Brad Ahikian and Elizabeth Wong for the neighboring property owners. Yesterday, I believe it was sent to you as well. There are some existing issues that we have met with these neighbors in the past a couple times, and we're working out some of the issues, and there were some new issues that were brought up in this letter that we have not heard before. I do want to say that I think you also received a letter that was sent from our attorney's office.
From Albert Yang?
From Albert Yang on Monday. So our attorney, the city's attorney's office, and the neighbors' attorneys are in communications, and that ask that city staff continue meeting with these neighbors to work out these issues, but we'd still like to hear comments about the building. We're not asking for recommendations of approval for today, but we'd like to hear comments from the board regarding this project.
Thank you. So just to go over it, we have the correspondence in the packet. We have the Valentine's Day letter from Mrs. Wong and Mr. Hikian. And we have a pretty long memo from our colleague Peter Balte about his comments on the first round and his subsequent responses. I think those are all available to the public. Okay, it's over to us. Any questions of staff before we go on?
I have one question. So there's an existing bus stop on Hamilton near the mailboxes, and is that proposed to stay in the various scenarios where the bulb out gets wider, or we retain street parking and whatnot?
Yes, the bus station or the bus stop will stay in the same location.
Okay, but if you widen the sidewalks in that on Hamilton, does that mean the bus stop is going to block traffic?
It will temporarily block traffic. That was the recommendation by the Transportation Division, to leave it there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions before we start? Robert?
Yeah, I just have one question. The comment was brought up about an informal parking space. What exactly is that? Is that sort of a, hey, we're here first thing in the morning, so it's ours? I mean, I can understand, from what I understand, or what I heard was there was one, I guess, a parking space that's sort of dedicated to the adjacent property owner, and the second one was an informal dedication?
It's
or?
parallel. I think
I'm
it
not trying to
refers to
be
the fact that you
facetious.
could actually park a car there.
A formal-
Substandard space.
I would try to answer that to say a formal parking space would be one that meets the city's codes, and, as far as...
But I mean, the idea being that it's, I don't want to say owned by them, but they park it there and nobody else can park there? The formal one?
I'm not clear on it, but I imagine it's on their property, not on the city's property, where they're parking.
Okay, obviously, if it's on their property,
in a way that
then-
doesn't
then
comply
it's
with
theirs. Yeah, okay.
a standard parking space size or access.
Perhaps we could ask Mr. Rodriguez to elaborate, because I was looking at it this morning and I was thinking that just identify which property and which spaces you're talking about, maybe looking at the site plan.
And also, if you could you show where your grease interceptor is located?
I'll try and do my best here. So I'll walk you through what we mean by formal and informal spaces. Let me get this going real quick. Even with glasses, I can barely see that. Okay, so the way the site works today, this is your typical scenario every morning. So you see all the service vehicles that are kind of coming in and kind of parking in the spaces in the lot. Those vehicles also park adjacent to the building. So it's very common at both buildings for delivery trucks to park up right up to the sides of the buildings here. And so they do temporary blockage of the alleyways or the aisles, but that's how the informal parking spaces work, and they're used mostly as commercial loading zones for pulling food out of or dropping materials within the buildings. And here's another kind of view. Here you see the formal parking space is a 90-degree head-in space kind of adjacent to this wall for the Perfect Cover building. Here's that informal second kind of parallel parking space that's used regularly by the building. So all in all, there's about a 3 parking space loss as a result of the projects of those 2 buildings. Here's more service vehicles here out in the back dropping things off during the day.
Thank you.
And then also, if you could answer, where exactly is your grease interceptor located?
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Wong, and my family and I own the 560 Waverly Street. So the grease traps are inside the kitchen. There are 2 below the floor grease traps, and they are in the middle and frontage of the restaurant.
Okay, all I needed to know was just whether they were inside or outside. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
that's it right now.
Okay, so thank you all for your informative presentations. We appreciate them. Complicated project, complicated site. Do you want to just start with an initial round of comments, or do you want to sort out the issues first? Start with comments first, general comments first?
We could do 2 rounds. Of
Let's do
site
2 rounds.
issues and then building.
Yeah, let's talk about site issues first. Robert. Site plan
Okay,
issues.
I like the idea that I guess has been floated and lately, other than what we've seen, is the more of an access or an alley, whatever you want to call it, between the AT&T building and the project. I think having been down there quite a bit, you see there's a lot of traffic that moves back and forth from Gilman across to Lane 21, so I think that's a good idea. I can see the point that I think one of the board members mentioned we should set the building back a little bit further, but you get into a point where parking spaces, have a certain set requirement, so you can't just say, well, we'll shrink the building by 8 feet, because that, as was mentioned, could eliminate, a whole row of parking. So I'm okay with it the way it is. In the other direction, like I said, if we do one away from AT&T, that would only lose a couple of parking spaces, so I'm okay with that. I think other than that, the fact that we're providing a trash enclosure for the, to assist the adjacent property owners, I think is a great idea. And I mean, that's a very generous way to do it. I mean, I've been in situations where, just because a property owner has had a convenient situation in respect to either a vacant lot next door or whatever the case is for 20, 30 years, doesn't mean that that's a God-given right. It just means that you happen to have been lucky for 20 or 30 years. So with this building being placed right next to those existing buildings are going to cause some hardships. I'm well aware of that, but I don't really see changing the whole design based on that. In fact, to give them what they requested basically makes the building almost I don't want to say useless, but I mean, it really doesn't allow it to do the function it needs to do. So as far as the layout like this, I'm fairly happy with it. There was some questions I noticed on Board Member Balte's comment about going 2 floors down and cutting the height of it a little bit. I don't know, that's not really layout, but I think that would be a great idea. But obviously, any layer you go down increases the cost tremendously, so I can understand why. That's it for me at the moment.
Alex.
Great, so I do want to thank staff and the architects. I think the set and the staff report were all very clear, and was very thorough, and it was very easy to understand what you were trying to do. With regard to just with the site issues, my main struggle is with encroaching into the 7-foot special setback. I looked at it again this morning to try to see if just to help try to make up my mind about it. At the moment, I'm thinking it's a mistake. And we've done it before on other projects, right? 278 University, CHOPS building, your building here, and I supported all of those at that time, and I think that was the right decision or decisions. But I feel very differently about this one because it's a different block. It's a super block, right? That block goes from Waverly to Bryant. It's twice as long, and the facade length is fairly long, and all the other buildings are complying with the 7-foot special setback. So this is going to be the only one for 3 or 4 blocks that's going to, and I think it's going to stick out. I think it's going to look like a mistake. That's my take on it. Earlier this morning, I was wondering if the lower floors could stick in, if the upper 2 floors we're set back. I was trying to figure out a way to minimizing the, the parking reduction.
It's all about, right, it's
Yeah,
all about the parking
that's
yield.
what I've been trying to rack.
Right. Well, that's what we did at
brain around this.
240, if I may. I mean, so at 240, the building at the upper levels actually encroach into the 7-foot special or the 6-foot special setback there. But on the ground floor, we pushed it back so that you do have, it does acknowledge the 7-foot or 6-foot setback at 240. But you'd lose this parking along Hamilton.
I know. I guess at the end of the day, I'm wondering, is the site too small for what we're trying to put, what the city is asking you to put on there? And maybe it is.
May I just, through the chair, just ask a question? I did not understand Board Member Guyer's comment about the walkway along AT&T. Were you proposing a 10-foot walkway along the AT&T building?
Well, that's what I was thinking is...
Because that has the same effect on the parking then, right?
Well, yeah, but it shrinks it this way, so you're only losing a couple of spaces as compared to a whole row.
No, I think we'd lose the whole row. I mean, unless you went closer to the Taipan building and got rid of... We'd lose that whole row, Board Member. Well, you could just lose it on the ground floor if we kept the upper floor, but that would be a very dark, and I don't think that'd be a very good space.
Where are you thinking, Roger?
I wanted to...
I don't know, so part of the concern was that when we, looking at Board Member Balte's comment on the 10-foot alley we have along Taipei, he was saying that that would be a very unwelcoming and perhaps dangerous space. And it's got a 2-story building on one side and a 5-story building on the other. This would have a 75-foot story building on one side and a 75-foot and a 50-foot building on the other side. So I don't know how that could be a good amenity if the alternative walkway is not a good amenity.
Okay.
Right, so.
We'll continue. I think it's useful to do this in a slightly study session format because this is a complicated project. We've got a little time. We should be thinking about this. It's a big deal. And appreciate that. And we'll keep going with the comments, and I'm sure we'll have you up here answering questions again. Uzma, please.
Okay. So regarding site, I find that many parking garages suffer from not advertising bicycle parking adequately. And so the concept of bringing more attention to where the bike station is, pedestrian attention, the diagram that we saw today in the presentation, that brings circulation through there, I think is a good choice. Mainly because I think it will bring more attention to bike parking, because otherwise in parking garages it tends to get very lost. And I hope that that's also, like, as the project progresses, that's considered in terms of wayfinding and all that. The loading issue behind lot 84 and 85 is certainly something that needs to be addressed, mainly in that it would be, these areas are sort of meant to have these retail spaces thrive, and if we're siphoning off something that's essential for their operation, then I think that's a mistake. I'm not sure. It seems that the pedestrian access to lane 21 is being reconsidered, and potentially as that is being reconsidered, these concerns also ought to be integrated, perhaps reconfigured a little bit so that these spaces can stay operational, and we can still have a pedestrian pathway that works. I mean, as it is, looking at the plans, having the trash enclosure on one side and the back of house of these restaurants on the other side, that in itself isn't an ideal alley in terms of program. And potentially there's a way to shift things so that the back of house, is on one side and the pedestrian amenity access is on the other side. So I'm not sure what the solution is, but I do think it needs a further look and potential reconfiguration on that side. And and not just for what they need, but loading and stuff. This is a commercial area, and loading is an important part of that, and I don't really see any solutions there. Those are my comments for site.
Thank you. Well, I share Uzma's view that I don't know what the solution is, but I do see a problem. And the problem, it tends to go about what is gained and what is lost, because there are all these unofficial, practical uses of these spaces. I know that this isn't a dedicated alley, and that historically these buildings probably didn't have any kind of official access down there. Could you explain to me, staff, what's the situation with lot 84 with what we call the prolific oven? Are there dedicated spaces behind that building that are entitled to some kind of access or not? I'm confused.
There is one dedicated space for their entitlement, which is why we included the Lot 84 space.
And that dedicated space essentially had an easement of necessity over the city parking lot? I mean, how were you supposed to access it?
Yeah.
We have no idea.
I'm
You
not sure.
could.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like a lot of sewer easements, actually. So let me say what I don't consider to be a problem, what I do consider to be a problem. I mean, anything that makes it more difficult for a business to thrive is, of course, a real problem. But things that are historic hangovers that would not be allowed and haven't been allowed for 20 or 30 years, I'm less inclined to try to solve. These buildings should all have, as Mr. Rapp's building does, interior trash places. I mean, these alleys are not intended to be used to store trash bins, though most of them are. And it's a long-term project to get that changed and get that storage off the alley and into other places. I think that using some of this space to solve that alley problem is a great idea. And I realize that it takes more time and energy to go to a somewhat removed central place. And if those buildings come down and get rebuilt, perhaps they're going to have to do interior storage. So we need to think about how that would access the alley for collection. I think we need some more thought about it might be useful to think some more about the whole trash problem in both parts of that alley, because it's a mess, with the exception of one property, and see if we can come up with a more comprehensive solution, which would be of benefit to the city, but it would also be of considerable benefit to the private property owners. So I'd like to see some more thinking about that. I mean, maybe more dedicated trash space so we could really, clean up that area. We're not going to get them all in there, but make that a much more attractive block, because we do have this problem of the super block that has had this informal access because of the parking lot, but isn't going to anymore. I'm not in favor of 24-foot alleys around this project or on either side. I'm not in favor of curb cuts on Waverly, so I think we need to be looking for other kinds of solutions, as you have been. I think pedestrian access is a big deal. I'm really pleased with your bicycle provisions, as you know. I'm really pleased to see benches with handrails so I can stand up when I'm even more frail and elderly. Or just on, the weeks that I'm carrying a heavy child or something around. I don't know what the solution is for good pedestrian access. I'm sure lighting has a lot to do with it. I'm sure design has a lot to do with it. I'm not convinced with that long alley. I ran into Alex this morning as we were both checking out the site one more time, and that is a long way along the Taipan frontage. That's a deep building, and I would rather this building were closer. I don't like violating the 7-foot setback because I think it's a real built setback. It's not just some historic artifact. Stanford got itself a really good campus architect after it put the business school in the wrong place and realized they'd messed up the line of sight down towards the quad. Well, this is not at that level, but this is a problem. I know when we talked about this before, you said with a 5-foot alley, you would need a different kind of ventilation design, but you weren't positive. I did not understand that to mean you needed mechanical ventilation. But I don't think that's going to be a very good space. And I think that intrusion is a problem for the findings we have to make. On low lighting level, I'm sure you can handle that. Drainage, I'm sure you can handle that. The fat, oil, and grease fog service, I don't know what the solution is, but I think there are a lot of restaurants that don't have big backstage access for big backstage trucks, so I'd like to know more about what's possible. I do know that it's a big issue for the city, and we own our sewers, and we want it to work as much as the property owners do. I don't think solar access is something that I expect this project to not interfere with. We don't have a law in this town that protects ancient lights, and there's a proposal to put substantial solar on the top of this building, so I would consider that a legitimate trade-off. I don't know if my colleagues would agree. Dust management, construction adverse impacts management, I think that's always our obligation. And it's going to be difficult. These things always are. Those are my comments at the moment.
Let me ask you then, what you're saying is push the whole building towards lot 85? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what I thought.
I do like the better retail. I do like the better, earlier chance to look at the post office. I did go on about that entryway a lot last time. I apologize. Shall we talk about design? Robert?
Okay. Well, I wasn't here for the last or the first presentation of this, and when I started reading over this, and the thing is basically, what I'm reading says that you wanted to relate to the church across the street. To me, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of sort of 70s brutalistic architecture, which I think that comes into now, whether that's right or wrong or whatever. I don't know if that's the appropriate thing to emulate. Although there is the Wells Fargo building across the street, which is brick, the AT&T building has brick in it. I don't know, to me that would be something a little bit better to emulate than the, not that I'm a big fan of the AT&T building, especially that elevation, but I'm talking about just the materials involved. And also the fact that the Wells Fargo building steps back at the corner. I know we talk about you should highlight a corner, but in this particular case, I'd rather do the opposite and have it step back at that corner to open up that intersection. It allows better view of, actually of the church, also of the post office, and I just think it works better that way. Because of that, I'm not a big fan of the stair tower right at the corner. I don't think that's doing anything. And the reality of it is when I first looked at, which is it basically elevate, or your sheet or your page, I guess Hamilton elevation 1, man, I swear that thing looks like a prison. I mean, because it is all just too uniform. I mean, all the metal, framing is going vertical. Like, I mean, I mean, I've seen metal mesh used, and and you have too, I'm sure. That's a little bit more creative. There's some design in it. The mesh is basically intended to create a form and yet still keep an open space, that sort of thing. But it doesn't have to be done in this. I mean, the only thing I can say in this, you copied the brutalism of the building across the street, which I don't think is a good thing on this particular case. It creates a massive volume that I don't think needs to be there. So I like the way you opened up the corner, so you did it on a horizontal plane, but you didn't do it on a vertical plane. I'd prefer to see that corner opened up like you did, and then also stepped back. So actually, on this, like I said, I wasn't there last time, but option 3, or even 1, where that stairway is open, I think works better than enclosing it. I don't think you're doing, I mean, it's not like you're doing, weather protection. To me, it's not really doing anything. Right now, stairways that are glass enclosed are very popular, but that doesn't make it work in this particular case. Let's see, what else? Like I said, I agree that I think the building ought to be pushed back, and it should line up at least with the AT&T building, which would make everybody happier here as far as obtaining the full 7 feet. I agree, as I said earlier, the alleyway would be nice, or the pedestrian access, but it's not critical. As long as we come up with something that does it from the Hamilton to alley 21, whatever it's called, lane 21, I think there needs to be some access there that needs to be developed. And I understand, just taking, it doesn't need to even be adjacent to the building, either through the building or something that is highly accented. I mean, for example, Mountain View has, on Castro Street, has these sort of walkways in between the buildings that have been very nicely done. I'm not saying you need to emulate that, but they've given it some, where it actually shows like some thought was given to get from point A to point B, not we're sneaking through the parking garage to get to, to the alley. I think that's it for right now.
Thank you. Alex?
Okay, so on the design, I think you've done, just wait. Okay, I think you've done a very good job. I like, I think you have like a second floor cornice element to align with the smaller scale buildings. I think the fins work well. I like the revisions that you've made around the corner stair access. I think the deeper retail space makes a lot of sense. And I like the, I guess we call like the setback and awnings that you've done near the AT&T building. You tried to break the mass and change the materials, and I think that's all working. I think the integral planters and benches, I think, are working really well. So I think I can support all of those elements design-wise. I have a question, and I don't think I need an answer today, but is the garage going to be painted? So on some of the other garages that have come to the board from Stanford, they said that they weren't going to paint them, mostly based on the sustainable design criteria. Like, it's just less paint, less off-gassing. But then when I went to see them, lo and behold, they were all painted. And I don't know exactly what happened with those, but I do know on other projects at Stanford, they've had problems with the concrete. So they're patching the concrete because of the popcorn texture. And I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but I guess I would like some sort of thought about that, because I think it does make a difference. Yep, great. And on the landscape design, I think I am concerned about the ginkgos in the pedestrian walkway. I mean, I think those typically require full sun, and I don't think you're going to get it in the shade of on the north side of a tall building. Same thing with the vines on the north side. I mean, most vines require full sun, or at least part sun. I think there's like creeping fig doesn't like full sun, but then it doesn't need green screen either, right? It would prefer to grow in a wall. So I'm not sure that all of the landscaping is working in the pedestrian walkway area. And if the walkway area is only 10 feet wide, I think my hunch is that the best thing to do is just try to keep everything as open as possible. And not try to hide the building. Yeah, so
the building, you'll be able to see into the building as you walk along the alley. So there's an elevation, I think, in your packet.
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned about the green, mostly the tall green screen panels, if that's really going to work. Even if the plants don't do well there, I mean, I think the green screen is a nice enough material. I think you would also propose maybe stainless steel wires,
right?
As an alternate as well. So.
I mean, you're saying that as a texture alone, without the plant material.
Yeah, even if so maybe the best thing to do is plant it. But even if it fails, I think it's still okay. I've had that problem with
and the garage is painted, except where the concrete is on the two street frontages. That's a sandblasted concrete, and that'll just have a clear sealer, like a siloxane sealer or something on it.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think that's all. I think that's all that I have on the building design. I think you've done a really good job. I don't necessarily agree with the programming and setbacks and all of that. And I would also just disclose I did watch the council meeting on January 22nd about the California Avenue garage, but they referenced this one as well. And so I'm kind of curious to see where the council ends up on this particular project.
Thank you.
Okay.
Esma.
So I would say that my views on this probably more closely align with Board Member Guyer's views. It is, the idea that it looks like a prison is not inaccurate. It does seem quite overbearing. Unlike my fellow board member, I am actually a very big fan of brutalist architecture, but it needs to be done well. And brutalist architecture does well when there is a lot of green, like a lot of planting, and when there are more interesting forms than just the orthogonal. And the materiality is also a big part of it. I'm unconvinced, at least in the renders, how the sandblasted concrete and the metal fins pertain to the historic. I saw a note that the metal fins pertain to the historic context, and it's very unconvincing right now how that is the case. But I do appreciate the concept to include a lot of greenery in it. I think greenery definitely softens the brutalist architecture, but like Board Member Liu says, it does have to succeed, and I disagree. At least I'm unsure if it does fail, what that screen is. Is it just kind of a cage? I feel like there is a green screen product, but I'm not sure if that's what you're speccing here. And I'm also unconvinced if that is what you're speccing, if that will actually look good. So I think some more thought to the overall appearance does need to be considered. I am also not a fan of the stair tower as it stands. It seems under-designed in that the relationship between the edges and the floor and the stair are sort of out of sync. I think those datums and planes that you're creating don't mesh well and create a really awkward space as you're exiting from the stair. And I am concerned about the facade behind the existing lots currently in the render, they look blank. So I'm looking at the aerial view at Waverly on ARB sheet 3.6. And in the elevation, like the facade is very much present on Hamilton, but given that this building is so tall, it's likely that we'll see some of it from behind, and so it seems like that back alley area is ignored, and the building as it stands, as it's designed, will, if we're trying to make that alley nice, it's definitely being ignored right now. I do like the PV panels. I think they actually add something architecturally that the building doesn't have right now. So what that says, I don't know, that maybe that sort of breakdown of mass or texture is something to consider. And those are my comments.
Thank you. I still like the idea that you have a two-story element along most of it. I agree with Ozma that it looks better with a lid on. It looks better with the PV panels in place, at least in this drawing. I don't know what the street experience would be, but it becomes a better looking building, I think. It also keeps the stair enclosure from sort of appearing detached in an unpleasant way. I'm really perplexed by the staircase. I know that in September I was complaining that we have other unsuccessful open staircases on parking garages, which are wet when it rains and too hot when it's sunny and look like they're askew as you walk down the sidewalk. I don't know what the answer is, but smaller, lighter, less obtrusive, I would be supportive of. I think that open's better. I don't know how you design the staircase to get that. I suspect you don't do a spiral the way we did over on, Alma and...
The Joe Balomas.
Yeah, Joe Balomas, but at least it was compact. And the poetry's good. But I think this has become too big, and that there's a better solution that a skilled architect can figure out. I don't know what it is. I don't know how these vertical fins are going to look. I don't know if it's going to look like, a City of Courts jail, or if it's going to look differently. It is very vertical, and you took a comb and you went like this, and as we were talking, I was thinking, well, what if it didn't just go like this? Maybe it becomes impossibly complex to design and execute and maintain. But as it stands, it looks oppressively linear, not at all playful. Garages are a problem. We all know this. We're a little embarrassed by them, but they can be beautiful because they're big spaces. How high is the ceiling on the ground floor?
The ceiling height underneath the beams is 8.5 feet. And then the beam pocket is about 2.5 feet. So in between beams, it's taller. So the story height.
If I'm walking through it, what do I experience?
You'll experience every 18 feet, there's a beam. So in between, it's about 11 feet, and then it's 8.5 feet where the beams occur.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that, about the ceiling heights? So there are, I'm thinking like Santana Row, the first floor height of the garage, I think my recollection is that it's taller.
The one that's up against Winchester?
Yes. Or something like, I'm just thinking that, I'm thinking that there are other garages where they've done a taller first floor to make it more open.
Yes,
I don't know.
There's different height. 11.5 is the most normal height
okay.
we do. It's really about the ramp to get.
Right, the longer.
When you raise it up, you need a longer ramp to get.
Do you have if you had a 16-foot ceiling, is it like a 1 to 20 ramp?
The ramp we have now is about 18% on the main slope with blends top and bottom to get up the 11.5 feet that we have now. And so
Right, so you'd have
it's
to increase, right, but to go up to a 16-foot ceiling, you're going to have to increase the ramp somewhere like
We need
40,
more
or
length.
a lot, like two, and probably doesn't work, I would think.
we would lose parking spaces to somehow to do that, to make a circulation. I'm not sure exactly how we would do it right now. Or, yeah, because it's going to cut into the retail space. There's so little floor plate left, yeah.
So what's is that bottom of structure, does that continue to the retail so that the retail height would be, if there was a drop ceiling, it would be about 8
In the
feet?
retail space, we've been able to remove those beams, so it goes all the way to the bottom of the slab, which is about 11 feet.
Okay, thanks.
I guess I was thinking that I hope it's as high as we can make it because it has a big impact on the experience of walking through that space. I'm trying to think of garages I enjoy walking through, and there are some. Oh, by the way, do you have a materials board that we could see?
I thought Alex indicated he had it.
I've just got a couple more questions. Can I jump in? Or are you-
Absolutely.
Yeah, a couple of things, and it's funny because I thought the same thing with the panels, and I think the reality of it is, it's the old adage about a building should have a base, a middle, and a top, and this building seems to have a base and a middle, and there's no top. You know, it just sort of dies at the top, and the panels, I think, create that. The other thing I was thinking, I still think there needs to be some sort of a link, like I said, across there, but I understand what you're talking about, the parking. So my thought was, the alley that is, or the walkway alley, whatever you want to call it, in between the existing neighbors, like, 48 or 84 and 85 and the AT&T building, that alleyway basically, what if that just continues straight down towards Hamilton? So basically you're losing 4 parking spaces.
Right, we were talking, but
It also-
Whatever, but I mean, it's still a whole lot less than, and you could do that on one floor, just that one.
it's just the conflict with the ramp.
Yeah, the ramp starts to go up.
Everybody coming up and down the ramp.
There would be a conflict in elevations between the pedestrian alley and the ramp going up to the floors.
Well, okay, I mean, maybe it needs to jogs, whatever. All I'm saying is if you do it in the middle of the building like that, you can get that and still not lose a whole row of parking.
Correct. If we didn't have the ramp, it'd be a lot easier. So I do have.
I don't know, these mechanical lifts are sounding better and better.
There is a way through the building, right?
Let me ask one other question, seeing as though this is somewhat of a, we have a 130,000 square foot building here, and we've got 2,000 square feet of retail space. I don't know, retail space in parking structures, to me, have always been sort of used to hide so you're walking past it. I mean, seeing as though, do we really need the extra 2,000 square feet, or would we be better having another 10 parking spaces?
Yeah, so council directed us to include the retail on the Waverly frontage.
What, supposedly, like, gosh, we're hiding the parking structure behind this 2,000 square feet of retail space? Come on. You got a 4-story building with,
I actually think it's about just the retail continuity for the experience along Waverly, the sidewalk.
We actually have quite successful retail in a parking garage over on Lytton.
I don't know,
But-
for that 2,000 to 130,000 ratio, it seems kind of, okay.
Well, let's see if we can get some coherent direction, or at least clues. Okay. Yes, go ahead. Commissioner.
Sorry, I just have some follow-up comments after looking at the material board. And one
Oh, yes,
question.
please, from everybody.
I have one question. For the perforated metal panel, in the material board, there's a Preston image from the De Young Museum, and then there's that metal sample. So they're quite different. So which one, is it going to be the metal, the silver with the different circles?
No, actually, the drawings indicate that it's a bronze-colored perforated metal. However, there's been discussion with the Art Commission and the artist, that's Amy Landsberg, that she would like to be able to use this mesh as her backdrop for the public art. And so we wanted to come before you today without the public art. We don't know what it is yet exactly, but if this notion of the perforated metal on that stair tower is not something that you think is supportable because it's too overbearing, then we're going to need to rethink that. But I was not proposing the clear anodized finish. We were proposing a finish that's more consistent, I think, with the historical context in terms of color. And I also think the metal fins, in terms of color, is where I was relating to the historical context, not in terms of the material or the shape of the metal fin. It's the color.
So in light of that, I did also note here that the M1 channel color, as you have it on there, appears to me far too dark, but perhaps there's a way that it can be reintegrated that might be more convincing. I find that, what the De Young precedent, where they had an image that they water jet cut over a bunch of metal panels, that's very successful, and that's not communicated in your drawings. In your drawings, it looks like a big wall, but when it has that level of complexity, it becomes really exciting.
Yeah.
And I would almost say, that level of, depending on how you work with your artists, instead of using the metal fins, that would be really exciting to have across the whole garage, depending on how you do it.
Yeah. That was one of the options that we had in September.
Okay.
But thank you.
Our thinking is evolving.
Yeah.
But I think it's a matter of representation, because I didn't read that off of this, but once I looked at your material board, that's instantly already way more exciting in terms of a prospect for down here.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see if we can get some clarity. So on the site plan, we have 3 people who would support an increased setback on Hamilton. Everybody but Uzma, is that right?
I can support that as well.
Okay, which is a very difficult design issue, but we think it's important. In terms of any direction we want to give on pedestrian access through the building, just figure it out. We think it's important.
I still think there needs to be some link from Hamilton to
Yeah,
across, yeah.
essentially from the Gilman
Right.
back to CVS. That is a good one. Looks good, safe, inviting, people going to do it. We would like as high a ceiling on the ground floor as possible, as feasible, to make it a better pedestrian experience.
Well, the other possibility is instead of the actual slab being different, is the framing being different, so you don't end up with a 3.5-inch deep beam, but you have either more beams or space closer together. And that way, the biggest thing is when you're looking down, you perceive the 8.5-foot level, not the ceiling. So if we could change that 8.5 to 10 feet and have the framing much more, tighter increment, it would make it visually look a whole lot, and even if it's just for a certain portion or a certain bay.
Even just to highlight the
Which would
pedestrian
be
way.
the one where you walk through, you can keep the other framing the way it is.
I'm sure that made sense to the technically skilled.
Okay.
We want the perception of height.
So going through the garage is an option in your mind for this pedestrian pathway. It doesn't have to be something that's open to the sky.
Right, no, I agree, right.
Yes.
It just has to be something, and that's why I was thinking, in between that one set of bays that I mentioned, if you change the framing in just for that first floor, it's not going to be radically different, but the perception, if you get that up to 10 feet, I don't think anyone would have a problem, and it's well lit walking through that garage area. And obviously, it's not the full length, it's only the, Right.
the one leg.
I think, we all think it could be in the first floor of the garage, is that correct? The pedestrian throughway? And I think the point we're trying to make is that it should be attractive, it should feel safe, and it shouldn't feel like an afterthought. It should feel like something you designed in from the beginning so that you
Right,
don't
that
just
you're
think
not
you're
dodging through the...
doing something you shouldn't be doing.
So, straight.
Okay, what else can we agree on? What do we think about the staircase? Open, closed, covered, somewhere else entirely?
I don't really care if it's open or closed, I just think it's too dominant right on the corner.
What would you do with it?
I don't know, I'm not the architect.
I understand that. You mean it shouldn't be on, you're saying you don't like the corner as a location for the staircase?
No, the location's fine. All I'm saying is, I don't like the massive bulk of it.
It's too big.
And that's why if you get rid of the screen around it, it automatically reduces the volumetric bulk of it.
Can I ask a question for Ken? So the volume of the perforated screen is larger than the staircase.
That's
so you have extra space in
you're
there.
in a space, yeah, there's extra space there.
But you obviously did that for a reason, so I was wondering if you could explain
Well,
the rationale.
we wanted it to feel like you were actually in a space. When you duck under that volume, you sort of, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a celebration, but you've got this larger space that you're looking up into, which could be quite interesting, as opposed to it just enclosing what's required for the stair.
Well, would it be worth then, even in something like that, having the first floor at the same footprint that you have now, and then it tapers inward or something? That then it has a perception of reduction of volume?
Yeah, we'd have to study it.
I'm just saying that
I mean,
then
I'm sure
still,
there's ways.
it gives, what I'm more interested in is a step back effect.
Right.
Even if it's the screen that does the stepping back, it still has that.
Right. Because right now it's about 20-something feet back from the facade on Waverly, but it's not nearly that far back from the other side, yeah, so, yeah. Maybe we
What's
turn
the
it.
top? Is it open to the sky?
No, it's enclosed. We had a skylight up there originally, but I think that from a cost standpoint, that's been eliminated.
And so what is it?
It's just a solid roof.
So it's going to be dark?
Well, no. So this it's going to have this perforated, membrane around it, so it's going to feel light, and at night will glow. That may not be a good thing.
Okay.
And if there was this wonderful way to create a design in the perforated panel, it could be really exciting.
If you make it fabulously beautiful, we'll probably say yes. We have been talking about the fact that seeing the public art as something that comes late in the process is really unfortunate. And of course, it's impossible to make everything happen at once. But I think that in this case particularly, it may be really important. So do we have any consensus on the stairway and its treatment, or stairwell and its treatment, Alex?
I would just say, I think Ken is very talented, and I think he hears that we think it may be too big. So I would just think, let's show us some options, and we'll see. And if there are any conceptual sketches from the artist, but by the next meeting, I think that usually the board here can make the leap. We did that for the Junior Museum. I think we asked for, at the very end of the project, we sort of asked for it to come back to the board, just because they weren't sure where the art was, exactly where it was going to be placed, right? And then they came up with a sketch, and I think everybody was happy with it.
Okay.
I think I'm fine with the staircase conceptually.
Yeah, I think if if you're going to use the material in the way that we've discussed and make it fabulously beautiful with the perforations with the artist, I think the next time you show this to us, it might be worth considering the representation so that we actually see what you're designing instead of a big old block.
Right. Well, this was just massing. We weren't asking for approval today. Yeah. Thank you for your comment.
And do we have comments on the trash enclosure issue? We have requests from the neighbors. We have proposals from the city. Do we have any guidance we want to give?
I know this is a tricky one.
Yeah.
So I've done some historical analysis of this site, and so it seems like the parking was added later, right? There's never been an official alley behind Prolific Oven or Taipan. So it's sort of like a de facto alley. I would say we would normally require the trash enclosures to be inside on their own property, and it's not, why are we giving them a freebie garbage space inside the garage? Because then everybody's gonna want one, right? So it seems to me difficult because because we don't really necessarily have a trigger until they start to do a project, right? Once they start doing a project, and I've seen this, I think they've seen the sign out there from the toy and sport world, but then we can require it inside. It seems to me if the buildings are staying as is, then I think it kind of makes sense for the city to have a space in the garage. And I don't think we need to have two. I think we do have other restaurants that do transport their garbage elsewhere. I think, Ken, I think you had mentioned at the Mills Florist site that the garage is not on the property. So it happens. It's not ideal. It's not desirable, but it happens.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking long term, you know, what is the right decision for a long period of time? It seems to me short term, I could probably live with any solution. So, yeah, Robert?
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing. I think this is the city being a nice guy and providing that. I agree that they could just say, you've been real lucky for the last whatever umpteen years, and now you're going to have to do what everybody else has to do. So I agree that anything that fits within the criteria of the project is okay.
I think, I mean, I agree that maybe providing the trash enclosure isn't the solution, but I do think that loading is important and giving them the access that they need in order to function is important. And maybe that is a closer analysis on how they currently, like what their current inner workings are in terms of trash, and it's just a matter, I do think that corner needs reconfiguration in general, because I don't think it works as it stands.
And I would say that essentially it's good for the city to accommodate this need. I'm sure that they'll listen to the potential future users in thinking about how and where it should be designed. You know, this is valuable space, and how the city wants to use it is it's essentially its choice. And I look forward to seeing what can be done. And I look forward to hearing about when this is constructed, how the FOG removal can be handled in a reasonable way. Okay. Yes.
Staff provide maybe transportation could provide what do you call it, like a truck turning diagram for getting for like the Apple store, because I've seen trucks behind there. Oh, maybe it's already in the packet. Okay.
It's included in the packet in the last page. This is the green waste
Gave up before you got there.
Okay, excellent. So you're saying it works.
Where is it?
Last page.
The last page I have is a bunch of cuts.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Thank you. And that's taking into account all the trash enclosures?
That's modeled for a green waste, the garbage collector, the hauler that the city uses, their garbage truck.
Okay. I think that's fine. Okay, I was actually thinking of I've seen delivery trucks bringing stuff to the Apple store, and then they double park in the alley. So I was just trying to figure out.
There's a lot of double parking in that alley.
Yeah, so I was just trying to make sure it
for.
works. Okay, but a truck can actually get through there, although it's
very tight.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any comments on landscaping before we go?
I don't think it works in the pedestrian walkway areas and on the north side.
It's too dark.
That could be just different landscape is required there.
Okay, so we're unconvinced, but, excuse me, would you like to respond?
No, I missed Alex's comment. You don't favor
So
the trash
how do
opening?
you, on the pedestrian walkway areas, for all the plants that are in the shade of the building on the north side? Like, have you had discussions about how
Are we going to have grow lights?
viable they are?
So
And
the
then,
landscape architect, with Marilyn Merrill, John POTUS, who couldn't make it today. I'd
aren't
like
we
him
also
to address
talking about
that, but he
pushing the
feels
building
confident
back
that
slightly?
he's
Talking
able to.
about rethinking that whole thing.
To accommodate that extra 7 feet?
Yep, we are.
So that means that alley is going to get a lot narrower.
But I think our point is,
well, not
Or a
necessarily,
lot,
well,
but-
no, I think there are two issues, right? I mean, there's the pedestrian walkway. The other issue is the setback. You could make a garage smaller and lose spaces. You could make the garage smaller and add motorcycle parking. Like, there are other,
Yeah, but I mean, shrinking the width of that garage by 7 feet.
we've given them a project.
Okay.
yeah. And I'm not, and so there's a 7-foot special setback, right? And they're encroaching 5 feet into it. And that's not to say that they couldn't,
We're actually going all the way.
With the columns go all the way to the property line.
okay. So I think I read
on a
5 feet somewhere in
You did.
there, okay.
Yeah.
But I would say we have other buildings downtown, you've done some of them, right, that have encroached a little bit, like 278 encroaches,
278 is the only building on that entire block of Bryant that
Right.
encroaches.
yeah.
And we have a display window as you're walking down the sidewalk towards
For the
University
benefit of
Avenue.
those of us who can't remember all the addresses,
It's
which
the-
is 278?
That's the Keen Shoes.
Got it.
Yeah, Bryant and University.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it can work. And my take on
And
it
then
is
at 240, we actually set the first floor
back. Yes.
so that you have the wide sidewalk, but the upper floors did not respect the setback. And we got a variance for that.
Yeah.
Because
and
if this were not being coupled with a rezoning, this would be a variance-full application. And instead, the city is proposing to change the Public Facilities District standards. Okay, so I think you've heard the aesthetic comments. Public art may save us all. We do not like this extent of encroachment into a built setback on a big street. And we don't think that the landscaping as proposed on the dark side of the building is likely to flourish. And we think that the staircase may or may not be terrific, but I think you've heard all our thoughts on that. You've got Board Member Balte's thoughts in his letter, which I'm sure will be shaped also by the hearing today. Anything else before we quit? Thank you all for indulging us in a rather free-form discussion. I think we want this project, it's a big project. The city is sitting here in at least three different aspects. It's the client, it's the staff, and it's the reviewing board. And we have had good participation from the public, which we appreciate. We look forward to seeing you again.
We need to make a motion.
And so you want us to continue this to a date certain to a date uncertain?
It can be to a date uncertain. It's fine because we're going to re-advertise anyways.
Would somebody make a motion?
I will make a motion that we continue this item to a date uncertain.
Is there a second? Robert seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Anything else before we adjourn? Okay. Do we have minutes to approve? No, we don't, do we? I didn't read any minutes. Okay. We are adjourned.